I'm going to talk a little bit about micrometers, measuring, and inches and metric. I've been brought up in the metric side of everything. Machining isn't my trade. I'm a boilermaker welder by trade, but I love metalwork, especially using the lathe, etc. when I was at school. Fell into the welding side of things. My mother was a single mother. Basically, I had to get a job as soon as possible. Welding job came up. The rest is history. Now I'm going back to something that I love to do in my own time. Saying that, as part of my progression through learning how to do the machining of the components and bits and pieces that I'm mucking around with, YouTube has been a great resource. Many hours of footage have I looked at from various guys that have put out their videos on certain subjects, and they are most appreciated. Having saying that, a lot of the stuff that you see out there is coming from the US, which is absolutely great. Only problem with that, if there is a problem, is the fact that they're always talking about inches. You know, 700 and something thousands and all that sort of jazz, and which, yes, I can convert them and change them and all that back to metric. Something has come to mind when I am doing projects with the metric side of things. It just may be just my problem, obviously it is my problem, in which I'm wondering whether the metric versions of calipers, micrometers, of the manual type, like these, do they have the same accuracy as Imperial? So I found myself reasonably often measuring something that had to be a certain size, let's say 7.5 millimeters. So you go past the 6 mark, come round to the 7, and for some reason sometimes I get confused and I end up finding myself being like 0.5 millimeter out. Luckily it's usually in the right direction for me, in which I'm too big on something, so you can take more off. I don't know what it is. You just seem to be able to move this little spindle around and move a fair bit of measurement, and I find out I'm quite a lot out. So what I'm thinking is, this in metric is 0 to 25 millimeters, right, or 1 inch ish. So that means I've got 25 little graduations plus your half graduations at the top, and then you've got 2 sets, well, not 2 sets, but you've got basically 50 graduations around the outside of this little barrel. So if I want to bring up a certain measurement, I've got to go like 12.75, I've got to find the 12, 50, and find the half, and then, anyway, prattling on a little bit. Made me wonder, when you think about it, with an inch, there's 1,000 graduations, because we talk in thousandths. So I was wondering if it would be easier for me just to be, as an experiment, seeing if I prefer to use the Imperial system. all the stuff that's in my projects that I'm doing for myself, except for very few rarities, it's basically a transfer device. So if I have a shaft that needs to be a certain, or that is a certain diameter, or it needs to be a certain diameter, I measure it with whatever device I have and use a similar measurement system to produce the fitting product that goes along with that. It's not like I have a widget or something, like take that drive roller I was working on and I had to produce 1,000 of those without the sample. It's a drawing, and here we are, you have to produce this plus or minus whatever the dimension is. Then it's really important to use whatever scale you're supposed to be using. Now, so I thought I'd do a little bit of an experiment. I have this set here, it's a 4-piece set, cheap. Now, how accurate are they? I mean, why buy a really expensive set? Is it repeatability? Is it longevity? Is it accuracy? I mean, particularly a micrometer like this, you can reset it to 0. And as it so happened, this one was 3/10 or something out. So I used its own little standard that comes with these, and I thought I'd compare it to a metric one. Not so much on the accuracy side, but more, I don't know, it's just of using the different systems. Who's to say these standards that come with these things, I mean everything else in this kit's cheap, so what's to say that the measurement on this is accurate? So I have a gauge block set here, which is apparently grade 1. I think there's grade 0 and 00 possibly for instrument level. So it's supposed to be pretty accurate. And these gauge blocks ring together very nicely. Just ring them together and they will stay stuck. So they haven't been made in an ad hoc fashion. So I've done a little experiment in which I've measured this 20mm gauge block with metric, different brand, it doesn't really matter on brand, this is also cheap, but I can tell you this one's made in India. And to speed things along a little bit, this measures exactly 20mm. Might as well do it. Come over. Come over a bit. Okay, so we'll remeasure that again in the center of the block. Okay, so I have got 20. So the center of the block, I did drop this gauge block actually, which I chastised myself. Can't see any damage. Right, so that's measured the center of the gauge block, and that is lining up exactly on 20. I don't know how well this is going to focus. Probably won't. So, get our inch. I've reset this one back to 0. It wasn't at 0. It was about 3/10 out. Got way too far, which is not bright. Measuring this in the same location. Okay. So, what I've got here is I can see it's gone past the 775 mark. So 75 plus 10 is 85, 86, 87. So it's 787 and 5/10. 4 or 5/10. It's really close. I'd say maybe 4/10. 787 and 4/10. So if we use a calculator, not going to be easy to do upside down. I'm going to give it a go. 787 and 4/10. Right. That is probably showing the garage floor roof, which is not good. Okay, I might come round and just talk to one camera. Okay, so I'm going to talk to Mr. Camera here because it's got autofocus. And let's bring him wide. Right. So, trying to look at this through here is going to be fun. Right. So, 787, 0.787 and 4/10. So that's got to be a 4. 0.7874 of an inch. Now, in my little researchy on the internet, according to the internet, the exact, what are we going to call it, conversion from inches to metric is 25.4 millimeters, no extra zeros, that's it, apparently. So, if I want to convert that to metric times 25.4, what number does it give me? Right, 19.9996. Okay. So, does that mean that has just measured 19.9996? Well, duh. But what I'm trying to get at is this other one. This guy here had measured exactly to 20, but the closest, the resolution that I can get out of that is 0.01 of a millimetre. Okay, so 0.01 of a millimetre. So let me just do some thinking here. 0.01 of a millimetre. .01 of a millimetre. Well, what's that in relation to a thousandth of an inch? So, you've got more than a thousandth of an inch with the Imperial, haven't you? Because it's a thousandth of an inch, yes, but then extra tenths. Is that another 10 times factor? So does that mean you can actually read to 10 thousandths of an inch? So 25.4 divided by 10 thousandths of an inch. Does that mean that you can actually measure with the Imperial device that I have over there to 0.002 of a millimetre instead of the 0.01 of a millimetre? Food for thought. Because when we get our cheapie, I say brand irrelevant, I'll try and cover it up, but this is not a slander. This is not a a degrading of anything, but it's partly you've got what I'm sort of trying to get at, which I've glossed over, is I've used a class 1 gauge block, and one measures 20 millimetres and the other one measures 19.9996 millimetres converted from inches. I think that's accurate enough. Now I've lost my train of thought. Yes, what is the smallest amount that you can measure on an Imperial? And I've got a feeling it's 1/10 of a thousandths, yes? So 1/10 of a thousandths has got to be 10,000ths of an inch. Or am I completely losing the plot? I mean, that's 0. And so that's 1,000ths. So if I can read the tenths of that, so I could go 2/10, which is there, 3/10, which is there, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, 10/10. That should now be at 1, which it is. So my resolution is 1/10 of a thousandths. So the resolution in this must be 10,000ths of an inch. Whereas the resolution of this can only be 0.01 of a millimetre, hence Imperial measurement device 0.0025 of a millimetre. So I can measure, it seems to me, resolution much more finely with this Imperial micrometer. Man, do I need to measure that? That's not really the point. I'm just wondering pros and cons. Once you get for all the metric guys, once you get your head around the thousandths, 100, a thousandths of a thousandths. I mean, it's even hard to say, but there are 1,000 thousandths in an inch. Once you get past that, it's not hard, 1 inch, 1,100 thousandths. Well, yeah, wow, 1 inch, 100,000, that sort of thing. I think in machining that's pretty good, especially when you're under an inch in stuff. 2 inches not so bad, because you grab, knocking the camera around, you're grabbing the device, the micrometer, that has already the inch inbuilt, as in, you're only measuring an inch again, aren't you? An inch from the inch. And then same with the 3, you're only measuring from 2 to 3 inch, because the 2 is already taken for granted, as long as you use the standard and the standards are accurate. It's once you get your measuring tapes out and you have to go, 3 inches and 5/16 and all that stuff. That's where I start losing the plot. That's where metric, to me, is way easier. 65 mil, boom, done. 3 inches, not even 3 inches, 2.5 inches. Is about 65, not quite. You get what I'm trying to say, I think. So I'm going to have a play with the next project or two, fiddling around with the Imperial micrometers, seeing if I like them more. It's just an interesting little experiment, and I don't know, I may have it completely cockeyed, but to me it sounds like, with these two cheap micrometers, both effectively measuring 25.4 millimetres or 1 inch, just depending on your conversion factor, it appears to me that the Imperial one can actually measure, is it 10 times more resolution? Don't know. Anyway,